To get us started this week, I want to ask you a question. Have you heard the phrase, worry is the opposite of faith? In other words, if you have faith, you won't worry. And if you do worry, then it means you don't have enough faith. Some people think that God will protect them and their loved ones if they simply have enough faith. They think they can somehow control the things that might cause them stress, worry, or anxiety simply by doing whatever they need to do to demonstrate their faith in God. But that approach doesn't work well. Because as soon as something bad happens in their lives, their faith takes a nosedive and their anxiety skyrockets. And as a result, their faith begins to look and feel like a roller coaster. Now maybe you were praying for someone you love to be healed from an illness, and when they weren't, your faith dipped quickly. Or maybe you prayed that your marriage would get better, and then it didn't. And so all that trust you had in God just dropped out completely. And because of that, you're now hesitant. You're afraid to get back on the journey of faith and fully embrace Jesus because you don't want to go on that same kind of emotional journey. You don't want to ride the roller coaster anymore. And if that's you, I get it. Trusting God when we aren't sure what will happen next isn't easy because often we're trusting God for an outcome. When something is stressing us out or causing us to worry, we pray. But we're not just praying. We're praying for a specific outcome. We want the person to be healed. We want our marriage to be saved. We want that promotion. We're praying and trusting that God will give us the outcome we want. And when that outcome doesn't happen, we can feel like God let us down. But what if I told you that instead of trusting God for something, we're really just supposed to trust God, period? That's it. We just trust Him. Now, I know that when someone says we should just trust God, it can bother us. If you're really going to trust God, does that mean you have no control? No role to play in all this? No choice? It's almost as if you're saying, I'm sick, but I'm not going to the doctor for medicine. I'm just going to wait and trust God to take care of it. And that makes no sense, right? Your choice to go to the doctor doesn't mean you lack faith or trust in God. It means you have the wisdom to know the right thing to do and the wisdom to trust that God is going to help you get better as you do it. Most of us have probably struggled with this issue at one time. At some point, we've reached a place where we've questioned the line between faith and lack of faith. The struggle to understand what it means to trust God in the midst of stress and anxiety is real. But I want to share with you a phrase that has helped me and may help you too, and it's this: God is in control. Some days when we look at the world, it's easy to say, really? You honestly think God is in control? The things I see on the news or the way my life feels certainly doesn't make me think that's true. But we can trace through history the reality that God is in control. It's a belief that's been a part of Christianity for thousands of years. And because of that, I truly do believe that God is in control. I mean, just look at the universe. It hangs together by a delicate thread. The more we learn and discover about the world around us, the more intricate and detailed we see that it is. It's a very fragile thing. And yet every day, the sun rises and sets. The earth orbits, the stars shine, it all keeps moving and working. And I believe that's because God is holding it all together. He holds it all in control. And I think He's in control of our lives in the same way. But I also think the Bible has more to add to that sentence. God is in control, but you have a role. Throughout the Bible, we see this tension between God's sovereignty and the actions of His people. I love the way St. Augustine described this idea. Look at what he wrote about 1700 years ago. Pray as though everything depended on God. Work as though everything depended on you. Now, for some of you, that first part is going to be the most difficult. You don't pray a whole lot. You just work and work and work and work and work. You do everything you can to ease your potential stress and worry in life by trying to create the outcome you want for yourself. Now, others of you may need to focus a little more on the second part of that sentence. You pray a lot, and that's about it. You don't do anything else. You don't take action to make any change happen. You don't play your part. So often we say, well, I'm trusting God with it, but then we don't look in the mirror. We don't follow our rope to find what's causing the very stress and anxiety that we're trying to trust God with. And I get it. The stuff at the end of the rope is hard to deal with sometimes. It makes us afraid. To really look at yourself in the face and take responsibility for the things you need to do in your life To really own what's at the end of your rope, that takes courage. And as we get older, we can lose our fearlessness. Courage seems harder to come by. And because it often takes courage to work as though things depended on us, we end up not playing the role we need to play. There's a powerful story in the Old Testament that I think can help us understand this. It's found in the book of Deuteronomy. But before we get there, let me set this up for you. Now, the Israelites were God's chosen people, and for a long time they were enslaved in Egypt. There were millions of them, and one man, Moses, led them out of Egypt toward the promised land. But instead of getting there right away, they ended up wandering in the desert for 40 years. What kept them from entering the promised land sooner? They were too afraid to do it. Their courage disappeared. And because of that, God basically said, well, you're going to have to wander in the wilderness until the next generation is ready to enter the promised land. So we pick up the story 39 years later, just as the people are finally ready to enter the promised land. Moses was still alive, and in this moment, he's reminding them of what happened all those years ago. He's reminding them of what their lack of courage cost them. Then, just as the Lord our God commanded us, we left Mount Sinai and traveled through the great and terrifying wilderness, as you yourselves remember, and headed toward the hill country of the Amorites. When we arrived at Kadesh Barnea, I said to you, you have now reached the hill country of the Amorites that the Lord our God is giving us. Look, he has placed the land in front of you. Go and occupy it as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, has promised you. Don't be afraid. Don't be discouraged. Moses told them what they already knew. God promised the land to them. They knew he was in control. They had nothing to fear or worry about. But what happened? But you all came to me and said, first, let's send out scouts to explore the land for us. They will advise us on the best route to take and which towns we should enter. They wanted the scouts to go in because they were afraid. They wanted them to go first and make sure everything was safe. Now, Moses, who gets implicated in this, said, this seemed like a good idea to me. So I chose 12 scouts, one from each of your tribes. They headed for the hill country and came to the valley at Eshcol and explored it. They picked some of its fruit and brought it back to us, and they reported, the land the Lord our God has given us is indeed a good land. Sounds great, right? The people should totally be ready to walk into the promised land. But look at what happens next. But you rebelled against the command of the Lord your God and refused to go in. You complained in your tents and said, the Lord must hate us. That's why he has brought us here from Egypt to hand us over to the Amorites to be slaughtered. Where can we go? Our brothers have demoralized us with their report. They tell us the people of the land are taller and more powerful than we are, and their towns are large, with walls rising high into the sky. We even saw giants there, the descendants of Anak. Okay, let's stop right there. Isn't this what we do sometimes? We think, well, if God really wanted me to do this, it wouldn't be so hard. We don't want to take the responsibility or do the work because we're scared. And instead of owning that, we just complain. We make excuses. We find reasons to discount everything we already know God has promised us because we don't have the courage we need to take responsibility in our lives. Moses continues, but I said to you, don't be shocked or afraid of them. The Lord your God is going ahead of you. He will fight for you, just as you saw him do in Egypt. And you saw how the Lord your God cared for you all along the way as you traveled through the wilderness, just as a father cares for his child. Now he has brought you to this place. Moses was reminding them of all the ways they'd seen God provide for them in the past. He was reminding them that God is in control. All of the things that made them worried or afraid or anxious along the way, God had taken care of those things. God had now brought them here, and it was their turn to do their part. For some of you, this is exactly where you are. God has brought you to the point of something you're scared to do. Maybe it's to quit your job, or to fight for your family, or to make that appointment with the doctor, or to pick up the phone and call that friend you haven't spoken to, or to start making better financial choices. You know what you've got to do, but you're scared to actually do it. Even though you've seen God be in control in the past, You're afraid this time will be different. You're missing your courage. And so were the Israelites. But even after all he did, you refused to trust the Lord your God, who goes before you looking for the best places to camp, guiding you with a pillar of fire by night and a pillar of cloud by day. When the Lord heard your complaining, he became very angry. So he solemnly swore, "Not one of you from this wicked generation will live to see the good land I swore to give your ancestors, except Caleb, son of Jephunneh. He will see this land because he has followed the Lord completely. I will give to him and his descendants some of the very land he explored during his scouting mission." So because they couldn't play their role, they missed out. They were still standing on the brink of the promised land some 39 years later. And only Caleb, the one who trusted God and took responsibility, was not only to enter the promised land, but would one day receive some of it as his own because of his courage and faith. As for Moses, "And the Lord was also angry with me because of you. He said to me, 'Moses, not even you will enter the promised land. Instead, your assistant, Joshua, son of Nun, will lead the people into the land. Encourage him, for he will lead Israel as they take possession of it.'" Though he led the people out of Egypt and toward the promised land, Moses' lack of courage to take them into the land cost him as well. Even he wouldn't see it. Instead, it would be Joshua, his faithful assistant, who would take the people across the long-awaited threshold. "I will give the land to your little ones, your innocent children. You were afraid they would be captured, but they will be the ones who occupy it. As for you, turn around now and go on back through the wilderness toward the Red Sea." The point is this: God is in control, but you have a role. And when we can't find the courage to take responsibility and play our role, it doesn't change the fact that God is in control, but it can change the outcome of the story. So this week, start by asking yourself this: what's your role? I'm going to guess that God is bringing something to mind right now. Something you need to start, something you need to quit, something you need to fight for, something you need to step into, or just something you're afraid to do. This week, start there. And remember, God is in control, but you have a role. So ask God to give you the courage to do it. And remember that no matter the outcome, God can be trusted.